What if Naruto had the golden touch? How would this affect a Naruto story, and would Naruto be able to control these incredible powers that would be gifted to him by a genie? Now, we all know in the original tale that we all were most likely told when we were like in third to like first grade of the story of the King Midas, who was so greedy that he wanted everything to turn to gold. Well, what would happen if we threw that ability into the world of the Naruto verse and slapped the name Kekkei Genkai into it? That's exactly what Naruto is going to be bestowed with. So if you guys are interested in how this story will unfold and what's going to change into the Naruto story, then make sure to stay up to date with the parts, turn on the post notifications to be up to date with part 2 when it drops, probably tomorrow or the next day. That said, if you guys are going to enjoy today's video, share it with a friend and leave a like if you guys finished the whole thing. But with all that out of the way, go ahead and enjoy the video.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Okay, so we start a story in a strange position where I usually don't like to start my stories off with. We're actually going to be starting the story off when Naruto is about 4 years old, when he recently gets kicked out of Hiruzen's house, and the way that we're going to be starting this is essentially right after Naruto pretty much runs out of money. We all know that in the original events of Naruto would usually be given a small allowance by Hiruzen and also have his apartment paid for. That's how Naruto was able to survive, and whenever he ran out of money, he would usually have to go out and fish for his food, or be treated to some free ramen by the ramen shop guy, right? We all know this story, right? But the thing in this version is that Hiruzen's going to be portrayed in a little bit more of a villainous role just to make the story hit a little different. So what we're going to be implying in this version of the story is basically Naruto would be very poor and would be out in the woods looking for some fish. Suddenly Naruto would end up falling down some random crevice that had like trees and like branches, and Naruto just fell down. When he fell down, he found a strange cave, and when he ended up pretty much like starting to like go towards the direction, you know, he like got up, he was like dusting himself off, you know what I mean? He began looking all over the place, just wondering, what is this place? This is when suddenly he basically like looked to the front where there was a little bit of light there. It was just like a little shimmer, a glow. Naruto ran towards it and immediately held this lamp in his hand. Now in Aladdin-like fashion, he begins to rub the dirt off of it, and this is when suddenly some genie would pop out. Not a blue one, but one in the episode of the Naruto filler. Do you guys remember that Naruto filler episode where they wanted to make a wish and like all the genin were pretty much fighting for the lamp? That's basically what Naruto does, except when he sees the genie, the first thing that comes to mind when the genie pretty much tells him he has one wish is essentially the fact that he has no money. Naruto would think about the thing that cost the most in his world, and as of this moment, it would be gold. So Naruto would wish that everything that he touches would turn to gold. The genie would ask him, like a gold Kekkei Genkai, and Naruto would say, I guess. And suddenly, the genie snaps, and Naruto suddenly has the ability to turn things to gold. The genie would then say, that is your one wish. See me in another 1,000 years. And Naruto would pretty much like just sit there as the genie goes right back into the lamp, and Naruto was just wondering what he has to do now. How is he even gonna get out of there? Naruto would ponder this question for a couple of days, and suddenly he would end up by kind of just crawling his way out of there by digging out of there and, you know, trying his absolute best to just jump from wall to wall to wall to wall until eventually he was able to get out. He learned how to do a bit of parkour that day since the hole was about, say, 15 feet deep. So it was pretty deep, but you know, nothing that he wasn't gonna be able to get out of at the end of the day, right? So basically what ends up happening following this small little situation is essentially Naruto goes around turning things into gold and making people very happy. Naruto was able to make a couple of things to gold and not exactly just show it off to everybody, but only to merchants. He would do this and he would use this method to essentially buy himself all the food that he could possibly want. Even the merchants that usually would throw things at him or tell him to get lost would now at this point be telling him that he should actively come to their store. Naruto was finally being shown signs of respect and signs of being wanted whatsoever. Naruto was loving this, and Naruto was feeling as if he could finally belong thanks to this brand new ability. But it is on this current day where Naruto would end up accidentally touching the man of one of the merchant's hands, and when he does so, the man would completely turn to gold. Naruto looks towards the direction of said man, and when he sees the man had turned into gold, he would drop everything, all the food that he had, as he would say to himself he didn't mean to. Everybody around the town would immediately realize this, and they would begin calling him a demon. Naruto would run out of there, seeing as he had never turned a human into gold before. This is the first time that he touched the actual human and he turned into gold, because Naruto hasn't been turning food into gold, because if he did, would have died. But Naruto had some sort of ability to kind of control it, but it was on this day where Naruto's power began growing more and more as, you know, he began using it more, and Naruto realized that the power was going to get overpowered and like out of control, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's basically what Naruto's kind of banking on. After he essentially transforms said man into gold, he pretty much ends up trying to run away. But it's at this moment that two Anbu members would actually get in front of Naruto and take him to report to Hiruzen's office, where Hiruzen would tell Naruto that because of what he did in harming a Konoha citizen today, he is going to now be banished to one of the outskirts of the village, and that is where Naruto's going to have to resign for the time being. Naruto's eyes would immediately widen after being told this by Hiruzen, and he would begin to essentially start begging for Hiruzen to change his mind. Hiruzen simply looks down at his papers and hits his pipe. Sorry, I smacked my mic, so if you guys heard like a rattling noise, that's what it was. But Hiruzen would simply hit his pipe and then look towards the direction of Naruto before simply telling him that he can leave now. And Naruto would begin trying to ask more, but the Anbu would immediately grab him and pretty much escort him to his brand new house, where Naruto was essentially going to be having to live in a shack that was made in a literal couple of hours by some ninja that didn't have any clue how to even make a shack. It's thin and it could barely be considered a roof over the top of his head. Naruto, upon being thrust here, would be given some water and some food to survive for the month. No money. Naruto would sit there as he would ponder to himself how he's supposed to survive. And it's at this moment that Naruto would realize that he's going to have to grow up faster than he was going to before if he's going to want to survive out here in these woods. He's not near the Forest of Death, but he's also not near a great part of the village that he's going to be completely safe in. So for the next week, he's pretty much going to be having to focus on building his own house, which is going to be made entirely of gold. And actually, no, it's not going to be made entirely of gold. I changed my mind. It's not going to be made out of gold. Instead, the outside is going to be made out of this like wood and stuff material, and the inside insulation system is just going to be gold. So whenever it's hot, Naruto pretty much starts heating up in there severely. When it's cold, Naruto was decently protected from the harsh environment of the outside world. And that's pretty much how Naruto's gonna have to survive for a little bit, just until he finally gets a little bit of control over his new abilities, jutsu, and said Kekkei Genkai. Naruto, through trial and error, after a couple of years of training, 8 years to be exact, would finally be able to gain some comprehension of his abilities that he now has access to. And the way that Naruto would be able to survive in terms of food was by selling his golden, things to merchants who were very greedy. And that's how Naruto would essentially make money, buy food for himself and clothe himself to go into the village. Also changing his hairstyle and cutting off his whiskers to appear different, to give off a different aspect of himself. His training, like I said, pretty much just consisted of trial and error, and he would pretty much try different things over and over and over again until eventually he figured out how to finally control his abilities of gold manipulation. Eventually, he made it so that he could actually give himself a light coat of gold around himself that could actually harden and protect himself, make his hit stronger, and make his defense almost impenetrable. The only one thing that he would be lacking in is chakra control, because that's the only thing that Naruto hasn't exactly been putting too much effort into. I mean, why would he? For the past 8 years, he's only been thinking about one thing: controlling his gold Kekkei Genkai. the curse that was placed upon him by the genie that he met in that cave that one day. And after this, he essentially continues to train for said 8 years until eventually he would tell Hiruzen that he's finally ready to return to the village. After another month, Hiruzen would finally hear out Naruto's pleas and would tell him that he has one task: to unreverse someone that he can turn into gold, like to turn an Anbu member into gold and then reverse it, and that if he doesn't do it, he'll be killed. Naruto would literally just walk up to the Anbu member, touch him once before then reversing the effects and transforming him back into a normal person. Hiruzen would be pretty pleased by this notion and would then tell Naruto that he has, he's gonna only have a couple of weeks to integrate himself into the academy. So good luck trying to get into this year. He'll be lucky if he gets into the next. Naruto would, bow down to Hiruzen and immediately begin rushing out of the room, before then thinking to himself that Hiruzen definitely was basically plotting against him, not wanting him to win, and Naruto just wonders why Hiruzen hates Naruto so much. And to be frank, why wouldn't Hiruzen? I mean, the Nine Tails killed his wife, and his position of just being a free man, not having to do no more paperwork, was pretty much taken away from him by Naruto because Minato died protecting the village and Naruto and the Nine-Tailed Beasts inside of him. That's like the little basis that this version of Hiruzen is going off of, just for this point in time, by the way. After this, he would now be known as the weird kid in the academy, and Naruto doesn't really go on to display many of his abilities, seeing as, Naruto doesn't want to pretty much flash that out all over the place. He kind of wants to keep that under wraps. And he would actually go on to fail the Ninja Academy test because his ninja knowledge is low. He would get tricked by Mizuki, and eventually he would try to take the scroll from Naruto. However, this time Naruto, after hearing of Mizuki's tactics, would rush towards the direction of Mizuki at top speeds that would actually catch Mizuki off guard and would be able to put his hand on Mizuki's face, completely transforming Mizuki into gold in a matter of seconds. Mizuki would look at Naruto before saying, "Wait, no, Naruto, and he'd stop. His entire body would be covered in gold, and Iruka would watch this display of power as he would look to Naruto and tell him that he was wrong about him, before then giving Naruto the Genin headband, establishing Naruto's role into the newly formed Team 7, and now Naruto's going to be able to get ready to pretty much meet his brand new teammates, Sasuke, Sakura, and his Jonin sensei, Kakashi Hatake. The next day, Naruto would wake up after essentially going on to fix up his room that had collected dust and a lot of insects over the years of it being unattended. Naruto would begin getting his stuff, drink his bowl of cereal, which would just so happen to have rotten milk, and then proceed to make his way towards the classroom. Naruto would begin to get a strange feeling in his stomach, and he would pretty much decide that it doesn't matter, as he ends up walking towards the classroom, entering inside, and then meeting his teammates Sakura and Sasuke. This is when he sits over pretty nearby them, and eventually all the Jonin senseis would arrive except for Kakashi, who would end up getting there about 2 hours later. This time around, Naruto's not exactly going to be playing that very, dumb prank in essence, and instead he's just kind of going to wait there and pretty much fall asleep. Eventually, when Kakashi enters the room and he sees Naruto passed out, he just taps him on the head. Naruto wakes up, goes upstairs, and the introductions would happen just like many of you would expect. I'm not even going to go over it because it's so basic, it's not even worth trying. But on one good thing, we save some time and we get it to the juicy parts of this video faster. So, we take the good with the bad. That said, the very next day after these introductions, Kakashi would pretty much tell them to not eat, and they would do so going towards the training grounds to meet Kakashi, only for him to arrive about 4 to 5 hours after they arrive at like 7 AM, so he arrives at like 12, and then he goes on to essentially inform them about the fact that they need to grab these bells, and if they don't, they're going back to the academy, saying that only 2 of them are going to pass, leading for the entire team to pretty much have a bit of tension built between them. It's at this moment that Kakashi would have realized that Sasuke is essentially trying to put himself on top of either of them, and whoever of them passes is going to pass. Naruto just looks with a dumb face and then just kind of looks towards the direction of Kakashi, having more more of a serious personality, just due to the fact that he's pretty much been alone for about 8 years of his life, not really having too much human interaction and having his hair down to show that he's not really as outgoing as he would be in the original versions of events. So Naruto would simply stand back with a darkened clothes instead of the bright orange colors that normally would be rocked by Naruto Uzumaki. As soon as Kakashi says to go, Naruto would immediately pretty much kick a rock to the side before putting his hands in his pockets and then rushing towards the direction of Kakashi. Kakashi, not really expecting Naruto to have shown such speed, has his book out and would actually have to sidestep using a bit of speed to actually dodge out of Naruto's direction. But it was already too late, seeing as Naruto had already slightly gotten a touch of Kakashi sensei by one of the bells. As soon as Kakashi notices this, with blinding speed, he would cut off one of the bells, leading it to drop to the ground and be covered in gold. As Naruto looks towards the direction of Kakashi, who would look at him with a dumbfounded expression on his face, as Naruto then rushes in once more and tries to grab him, touch him at all means, swiping at the air as Kakashi would jump back, backflip, and essentially parry each one of Naruto's attacks. Naruto would then go in for taijutsu attacks, but Kakashi would realize that he can't even dodge them or parry them in the traditional sense by simply moving them out of the way and by, grabbing his arms and redirecting the trajectory. So instead, he has to pretty much parry every single little attack that Naruto throws towards the direction of Kakashi. Kakashi, once he realizes this, kind of understands that he needs to create shadow clones, and each shadow clone would essentially get turned into gold until it pops, and the gold the gold would just disappear with the clones. Naruto, seeing that Kakashi's kind of catching on, would begin getting irritated, and it's at this moment that Sasuke jumps out of the bushes and shoots 3 fireball jutsus at the direction of Kakashi as he widens his eyes and says, "Genin art!" But then he jumps back, and suddenly we see Naruto there, who says, "Checkmate!" But he touches the Kakashi, and it turns out to be a substitution. He hits a log, the log turns to gold and falls onto the ground with a giant thud behind it, as Sasuke gives Naruto a strange expression and asks him what that ability is. Naruto says, "Questions later," as he rushes towards the direction of Kakashi once more, and he and Sasuke are both engaging in the battle. Sakura, who would be watching in the background, would begin to think to herself that she needs to do something. Sasuke-kun, he's gonna get hurt. She rushes in and she's like, "I'll help too." She throws a shuriken that almost actually hits Sasuke because she was not looking at what she was doing, and Sasuke's forced to pretty much draw back, leading Naruto to get kicked away by Kakashi, and then essentially, back away from the direction of Naruto. Naruto, once he gets up from the ground, would look towards the direction of Sakura with a death stare, and so would Sasuke, as she kind of just stands there looking at them both as they both rush back in, and they would fight for another literal hour. Until eventually, Kakashi would say, "All right, you guys failed to get the bells. Now, you have to be tied to the stump." He would go on to tie Naruto and Sasuke and not Sakura, and what he would go on to do is essentially see if Sakura was willing to help her teammates. She goes on to happily feed Naruto, and Naruto would simply watch with a blank expression, as Sasuke would look at Sakura and say, "We need to feed our teammate. If we're all not at 100%, then this is going to be even harder than it already is." Naruto's stomach would growl, and Sakura would immediately be like, "Okay, Sasuke, whatever you say," as she feeds Naruto, and suddenly we see Kakashi jumping out of the bushes as he looks at them and says, You pass!" They're all dumbfounded, and he goes on to explain the shinobi way that Obito taught him long ago, going I'm pretty sure you guys know the saying, I forgot it, but basically goes on to say that, and then goes on to simply explain to the team that those who abandon their teammates are scum, but those who those who abandon the rules are scum, but those who abandon their teammates are worse than scum, right? And then, they kind of understand the message slightly, and then Kakashi goes on to pretty much tell them to get ready, seeing as they're now going to be going on missions. And for the following 2 weeks, they would go on D rank missions, which would essentially consist of helping out with groceries, walking old ladies down the street, capturing cats, and things of that nature. Very, very simple missions like capturing wild animals and things like that are just being overall pests. Eventually, after 2 weeks would be over, Sakura would actually be the one to slightly remark to the Hokage that these missions are too easy. Hiruzen, hearing this, would say, "Oh, so you would like higher ranked missions," and Sakura goes on to profusely apologize before Kakashi would go on to state that the team seems to be ready. Hiruzen would listen to this by Kakashi and would then nod his head before then assigning them a C-rank mission to guard the bridge builder Tazuna to the land of the waves. Eventually, Kakashi looks towards the direction of Hiruzen and then goes on to say, alright, that's what we're going to be doing then, as Tazuna walks into the room all drunk and then begins to pretty much slander everybody on Team 7. Everybody immediately begins to get the impression that this guy is just a stinking drunk, and this is when all their first impressions would happen. He then goes on to meet the team the very next day at the bridge or at the village gates, and it's at this moment that they would embark on their quest to make their way towards the land of the waves. Along their way, about 3 hours or so into it, this is when Kakashi would spot a puddle not too far off in front of them. Naruto would spot said puddle as well, and when they're walking nearby it, the two demon brothers would lunge out as they rush towards the direction of Kakashi and essentially rush at him with chains and like their claw things as they go on to strike Kakashi, effectively killing him in front of the team. Sasuke immediately lunges into action and dodges and hits one of the demon brothers away as Naruto simply stares towards the direction of one of them and gives off this aura of like intensity. Not bloodlust, seeing as Naruto's never killed, but just intense aura. The demon brother still rushes in nonetheless, and Naruto goes on to promptly touch the demon brother. As the demon brother realizes what had just happened, it would be too late. He would fall on the ground, turn to gold, as Tazuna would be shocked at Naruto's ability, asking if he can do that to anything. Naruto would nod at him before then going on to explain that he has the innate ability to essentially turn things into gold. It's his KK Genkai. After Tazuna hears this, he begins to ask Naruto if he's going on these missions solely for fun, seeing as if he really wanted to, he could probably be the richest person on earth. Naruto goes on to shrug his shoulders, saying that he's always wanted to be a ninja. For some reason, the thought of, pretty much fighting people excites him. And Tazuna, after hearing this, would say no more to Naruto, seeing as he kind of gives off this aura of don't talk to me, and he would pretty much back away from Naruto as Kakashi arrives, unveiling to the team that he was never really even hurt. Everybody immediately goes on to pretty much say that, how could he do that, that they were shocked, and Sasuke and Naruto goes on to say like, okay, whatever, before getting right back to business and essentially walking a couple more hours when eventually fog would pretty much begin to thicken, and Tazuna would explain to the team that this is a normal occurrence in the land of the waves. Kakashi would not think twice about this, and suddenly Naruto would throw a shuriken at the direction of a white bunny. When he goes over to pick it up, Sakura would immediately start berating him, telling him how could he be so cruel. But it's at this moment that a gigantic blade would come at their direction, and Kakashi would scream, "Everybody duck!" Everybody does so, and immediately a man would stand atop the same blade that was just thrown at their direction. Kakashi looks at the direction of said man before then saying his name, Zabuza Momoishi. And from here, this strange man would look towards the direction of the team before then stating Kakashi's name and calling him the copycat ninja. Suddenly the team would be surprised as to what he means by that, and out of nowhere we would have the same battle as in the original events of Naruto go down. Kakashi and Zabuza would begin engaging in battle, and eventually Zabuza would get the upper hand via placing Kakashi in a water prison jutsu. It's at this moment that Naruto and Sasuke would both realize that something's definitely going on, as Naruto looks towards the direction of Sasuke and tells him that they need to make a plan now. And it's at this point that Sasuke realizes, that that's exactly what they need to do. So Sasuke just nods to Naruto as they both literally make a plan in the span of like a second and a blink, which is so crazy to me. Like, Naruto and Sasuke both made an insane elaborate plan in the span of like a second. They didn't even exchange words. They just looked at each other and nodded. And from here, Sasuke went on to grab a Demon Wind Shuriken and then throw it at the direction of Zabuza. Now obviously he dodges it, but there was actually a second one underneath it that, actually caused Zabuza to actually be caught off guard. Now when the second, Shuriken gets dodged by Zabuza, Naruto dispels the transformation jutsu and then grabs Zabuza with one hand as Zabuza is just stuck. Now, how do I put this? Zabuza, right, was sitting there, like holding his arm out to hold Kakashi into the water prison jutsu, right? But what ends up happening is basically Naruto pretty much ends up touching Zabuza, and the second he makes contact with Zabuza, Zabuza begins to turn or feel his arm turn into gold. It's at this moment that Zabuza realizes that he's done for if he doesn't literally cut it off now. So Zabuza is forced to pretty much cut his own arm off or else die here. And what do you know, Zabuza literally is forced to cut his arm off and let that thing sink to the bottom of the lake that they were standing on. It's at this moment that Haku from the shadows would bust in and throw a Senbon needle at the direction of Zabuza, leading Zabuza to pretty much be taken out earlier than he would have been in canon without Kakashi having to extend more chakra. He was able to deactivate his Sharingan, and from here the team went on to question Haku, but Haku didn't really mind this and just pretty much ended up making some BS story about how he's a ninja tracking mist from the, the hidden village in the mist or something like that, right? That ends up happening, and Kakashi simply nods, knowing that his chakra reserves are extremely low right now. If he was to try to fight this person one-on-one, he's really not too sure who would come out on top. So Kakashi decides it's a safer option to simply allow them to get away, recuperate, and try this again another day. And that's exactly what ends up happening. The team ends up letting Haku get away, and following this small altercation, they all make their way towards the house of Tazuna, where they end up meeting his daughter, Tsunami, and Inari. Now, once this all happens and they're all pretty much eating dinner in the kitchen, Tsunami whips something up and they all enjoy it a ton. But it's at this moment that Inari would bust into the kitchen and essentially begin berating them all, telling them that there's no point of them being here. They're just gonna die just like everybody else. Naruto, upon hearing this, would keep listening to Inari as he tells them that they have no idea how hard life is around here, that they have to survive off scraps, that everything just gets taken from them. And Naruto would sit there in silence, not even uttering a word, not even banging the table or even screaming at Inari like in the original. Naruto quite literally could not care any less what Inari thinks about him, because Naruto knows what it's like to actually live in a horrible environment where nobody cares about you. He didn't even have a mother to cook meals for him. Naruto, quite frankly, had nothing. And he's not going to argue with some pipsqueak about that. So instead, Naruto finishes his meal and makes his way outside, as Inari yells at him one more thing, calling him a loser, and Naruto simply walks out and begins training. He would go on to ask Kakashi if he could help him get his chakra control to subpar levels. And Kakashi would actually assist Naruto in this, telling him that he could definitely be of some assistance with that. And he goes on to essentially begin explaining the tree walking jutsu to Naruto before he explains it to everyone else, just so Naruto can get a bit of a handle of it. So by the time he teaches it to them, they all have equal understanding of chakra control and how to essentially muster up the chakra to their feet and help Naruto with his horrible chakra control due to the influence of the Nine Tails. About 4 days later, Kakashi goes on to finally start teaching the team some things, and the first thing that he goes on to teach them is essentially tree walking, something that Naruto turns out to be the last one to learn, and Sasuke is the second, with Sakura obviously being the first one, since she does have pretty great chakra control. I mean, it's probably super easy to control something when you basically have almost none of it, right? I mean, if I had no water, I'd probably be really good at, keeping it. But anyways, that's not the point. The point is that essentially after this happens, Kakashi actually has a lot more time to train Team 7 in Taijutsu, teach them a couple of extra jutsu, help them out with chakra control, and even actually go on to teach them water walking way earlier than they would have learned these things in canon. All three of them end up getting significantly stronger than they would have been in the original, and Naruto would also be working on his Golden Touch abilities, or his Golden Kekkei Genkai, as he knows it, as, they all begin working day by day by day by day, and eventually the day comes when Naruto pretty much ends up oversleeping. Now, why does he oversleep? Simply because he had worked himself to the bone the very previous day, and it's a good thing he did, because he was actually there to defend Inari and Tsunami from these intruders that would have made it their way to their house if Naruto wasn't there. They probably would be dead, but Naruto made sure to turn them both to gold and then rushed towards the direction of his team towards the bridge. Once he arrived, he pretty much ends up seeing a horrible sight. He sees Kakashi fighting against Zabuza, a thick fog, and then he also sees Haku, who is essentially sitting there inside a crystal ice mirror jutsu, with Sasuke getting hit with countless needles of Senbon. Naruto, upon seeing this, would immediately rush in towards that direction, and seeing as he's outside of the ice crystal dome, he begins to essentially touch each and every single one of the mirrors, slowly turning them to gold, or actually instantaneously, as Haku jumps from one mirror to another and ends up pretty much hitting a golden wall as hard as possible. Haku, upon seeing this, would question what? As you know, he pretty much was running full speed and then just crashed into a wall. That's pretty much what happened, right? Except Haku was moving like at lightning levels of speed, so it definitely rattled Haku up. So when Haku ended up pretty much hitting and ricocheting off of said mirror, he looks up towards the direction of Naruto only to wonder what happened, but Naruto looks to Sasuke and tells him to get up and stop acting weak. Sasuke gets up slowly with the Sharingan active and then says, "Who you calling weak, fool?" And suddenly, Naruto has a chuckle on his face as he then rushes towards the direction of Haku, and Haku, not knowing of Naruto's abilities, would actually begin getting close with hand-to-hand combat. Zabuza would say, "Haku, you idiot! Didn't I tell you?" And Haku was barely able to dodge out of the way of the attack, leading to Naruto not being able to actually turn him to gold. Naruto and Sasuke both rush in with taijutsu flurries, and it's at this point that Haku begins to have to get serious because he knows that if he doesn't, essentially Zabuza will die. Also, guys, I'm really not sure if you guys can hear it, but the neighbors are like blow drying their like yard or something like that, like leaf blowing their yard right now. So if you guys can hear it, million apologies, but I'm pretty sure you can't. Hold on, let me just stay silent. Yeah, I don't think you guys can hear it. Okay, but no, basically what ends up happening is essentially, what was I saying again? Oh yeah, Naruto and Sasuke were fighting against Haku, and eventually Naruto was able to land one concisive blow, which would actually cause Haku to get caught off guard and immediately begin transforming to gold. Haku didn't have enough time to react because he was fending off the attacks of Sasuke, so inevitably Haku began turning into gold fully, and Zabuza simply had to watch as he was being restrained by all of Kakashi's summonings, aka his dogs, and then got pierced right through the heart with a Chidori. And as this happened, the team looked towards Kakashi as he then, covered up his Sharingan once more and then dispelled the Chidori Jutsu, looking towards the team, asking them, "You guys are right?" Naruto immediately looks at Kakashi, nods his head, and Sasuke is actually a bit surprised by what Kakashi just did, asking Kakashi how it feels to kill. Kakashi simply looks towards the direction of Sasuke and says, "The first time, it hits like a train, Sasuke, but after you've done it hundreds of times, it's almost bland. You almost don't feel anything. It's just like taking a sip of water. It becomes second nature. Don't think about it too hard, Sasuke." As suddenly, a gigantic ship begins coming towards the direction of the bridge, and once it ends up pretty much landing, all of the men, aka Gato's men, end up getting off and pretty much beginning to take out their weapons and get creepy smiles on their faces, right? They all get these creepy smiles, and immediately all of them ask Gato what they should do with them. Suddenly Gato gets out and he immediately reveals that, he was never going to pay his Haku or Zabuza in the first place. Naruto goes on to undo the effects of the gold to Haku, and Haku, upon hearing the words from Gato saying he was never going to pay them, that Zabuza was just a tool, Haku immediately gets into a bloodthirsty state, right? Where he essentially ends up rushing towards the direction of Gato's men and throwing Senbon so fast that it's just in the blink of an eye, you would have missed it. Countless of them would just drop in an instant, and Haku would immediately get in front of Gato as, he looks at him with a death stare and then pierces him right through the throat as Gato falls into the water, and Haku would then turn his attention back towards Team 7, looking at Kakashi with anger in his eyes before then realizing that it was a fight to the death. It was either them or him. But thinking about, how Zabuza had died, Haku couldn't help but feel as if the real villain here was already taken care of. Haku lifted up his Senbon and then stopped, thinking that, it's not their fault Zabuza died. It was his, and he's already taken care of. Haku would tell them that they're no longer enemies anymore and would then begin to try to pretty much go away. But it's at this moment that Naruto would pretty much stop Haku and ask him if he has anywhere to go. Haku nods his head, and suddenly Naruto asks him if he's willing to join the Leaf Village, saying that Konoha would actually take care of him, and saying that they could give him a proper burial. And Haku, after hearing this, would actually kind of shed a tear and actually accept the proposal from Naruto, as they bury Zabuza, and Haku then instantly ends up becoming a Hidden Leaf Shinobi. That's a pretty good conclusion to the Land of the Waves arc, I would say, and a couple of events did actually end up changing just enough for this event to actually have been pretty interesting, all in all. They all eventually end up pretty much getting their thanks by all of the villagers and make their way back to Konoha for Haku to get tests done to see if he's worthy of becoming a Leaf Shinobi and to see if he is a traitor, and also asked to hand over some precious information that he may know about other countries. Haku would do so, and they would actually end up accepting Haku into the Leaf Village, with Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi being all informed of the Chunin exams. Now, with the Chunin exams being something that's definitely present on their minds, all of them go home, and there is actually no Konohamaru-Naruto interaction this time to lead to the Sand siblings to actually meet Team 7, just due to the fact that Naruto was never exactly close with Hiruzen, so he never even got to meet Konohamaru, and instead Konohamaru doesn't learn the Rasengan, he doesn't learn the sexy transformation, and everything that Konohamaru all in all would have been taught by Naruto never ends up happening. Instead, Naruto simply goes off and trains somewhere, and ends up making his way towards the Chunin Tower the day that they all have, well, the Chunin exams. Once they're there, a couple of moments don't really end up changing, so this is the point where I'm kind of going to just speed blitz the entire story, right? Sasuke ends up kind of getting into his battle with Lee. That doesn't change whatsoever. Lee goes on to ask Naruto if he wants to fight, and it's at this moment that Naruto would actually decline. And suddenly, Lee's just shocked, like, what? He doesn't want to fight me? Like, I didn't expect that. And Naruto says that he's gonna save his strength for the real battles. Lee agrees, and suddenly Guy Sensei comes in and punches Lee right across the face, telling him that, he's not allowed to use those abilities or even fight before the Chunin exams. And suddenly, all of them make their way towards the tower, only to be greeted by Kabuto and the rest of the other people who are just getting trying to make their way to Chunin. Eventually, they all end up passing the test, and Naruto doesn't have to give his incredible speech, so more and more people are actually eliminated because Naruto didn't give his words of encouragement to the rest of the people that would have stayed. That said, there's less people in the Chunin exams, and when all of them end up finally going in there, the event with Orochimaru, Anko would still end up happening, with Anko being like, weird person. But he doesn't exactly question it, and eventually Team 7 finds their way into the Forest of Death. And it's at this moment that Naruto goes on to essentially go off to take a leak, right? He goes off some sort of distance, and Sasuke goes on to tell him the code. Now, Naruto this time around isn't dumb, so he's going to actually remember the code, but when Orochimaru has the weapon holster on the wrong leg, Sasuke's immediately able to tell that that's not the real Naruto, going on to call him out and essentially telling him that he needs to get lost. Or actually not Orochimaru, but it's another ninja, right? They end up pretty much chasing him off, and suddenly the real Orochimaru appears in front of them. Sasuke has to stab himself in the leg to get over his fear, and then he ends up basically running away with Sakura, just long enough for Naruto to make his way towards their direction, and Orochimaru to ask who he is. Naruto would immediately go on to look towards the direction of Orochimaru as he tells him that that's none of his business. Orochimaru goes on to lick his lips before then rushing in and weaving a ton of hand signs, only to shoot out tons of snakes at the direction of Team 7 for Naruto to pretty much look at Sasuke and say, "Sasuke, now!" Sasuke just simply weaves hand signs and shoots a gigantic fire-style Fire Inferno Jutsu, sending all the snakes ablaze and leading Orochimaru to be happy. Quite impressed with Sasuke's development, I should say. And Sasuke would simply look towards the direction of Orochimaru before then breathing heavily and asking what he wants. Orochimaru jumps back, leaps on top of his gigantic snake before saying he simply wants friendly competition and their scroll as well as his eyes, as suddenly he begins to essentially rush at them with a gigantic snake. Naruto's adrenaline would begin pumping like never before, and his danger sense would go off the charts. Sasuke would get hit away, and Naruto, seeing his teammate pretty much get flung away, And then Sakura rushing off to help him and feeling a real sense of death's despair and just doom would finally tap into the Ninetales' power for the very first time. When he does so, his powers would skyrocket and he immediately blitzes towards the direction of the snake, holding it with one hand as it turns to gold and trying to blitz towards the direction of Orochimaru, who simply laughs at him and tells him that it's not gonna happen, kid. He goes on to just dodge all of his attacks as if he was a child and then kick Naruto away without Naruto even getting the chance to even lay a hand on him. Suddenly, he uses the 5-pronged seal and goes on to essentially block the abilities of the Ninetales, going on to give Sasuke a hiki on his neck before he then departs and tells them that he'll meet them again someday. Naruto passes out, Sasuke would as well, and suddenly the screen goes black. We're now suddenly in a different area and Zether's selling out for some reason. What? Zether's selling out? No, I'm kidding. I'm not selling out. But I am here to tell you guys about not exactly a sponsor to the video, but more of a, I guess you could kind of call it a sponsor, right? I have an affiliate code and you guys can actually go check out this company by the name of Some Slight Clothing. They sell the most dope anime merch. I have a bunch of pairs of shorts that they sell. I'm actually wearing them right now. I'm wearing the Law ones from the Wano arc, you know, the robe that all of them are forced to wear. I forgot what they're called, but that's the pair that I'm wearing today. Yesterday I wore the Gomu Gomu no Mi pair. The day before that I wore the Ope Ope no Mi pair. And yeah, all in all, Some Slight Clothing has a ton of dope anime fire designs, so you guys could definitely go check out. They're $35, but you guys could use my link down below in the description to get 10% off. And trust me guys, they are worth it. All the shorts that I currently own were bought by me prior to actually getting affiliated with these guys. So that's how you guys know that I genuinely support these guys and I love their stuff. I could actually even show you guys pictures of your boy rocking them if you really want to know. But yeah, click the link down below in the description, use my code Zether at checkout, and you will immediately be helping your boy out and the channel out. That said, once everything is all said and done and the team pretty much goes on to wake up, they all begin looking around and wondering, what's happening? Naruto wakes up, and by all I mean Naruto. I don't know why I said all of them, but it was Naruto, right? And when he wakes up, he sees Sasuke essentially going berserk on another team, crippling a dude and shattering his arms, and then going on to turn towards the rest of the team as Naruto lunges at Sasuke and touches him with one hand, telling Sasuke that this isn't him. He keeps Sasuke in the gold transformed state for a while, before then finally releasing Sasuke after everything had calmed down. And Sasuke is angry at Naruto, right? He looks at him and asks him, what'd he do that for? But Sakura hugs Sasuke from behind and begs him not to hurt Naruto or anybody else, that this isn't like him. Sasuke immediately scoffs and "Get off me!" before he suddenly then just looks towards the direction of Naruto and tells him to never get in his way again. Naruto says, "You got it." And suddenly, they make their way towards the Chunin Tower, where they're greeted by Kakashi Sensei and Iruka, and told about the preliminary part of the Chunin exams. Immediately jumping back into the Chunin exams, we essentially have all of the matches that would have been performed in the canon events, meaning Sasuke versus the guy who can absorb your chakra, Gaara versus Lee, Neji versus Hinata, and ultimately Naruto versus Kiba. Things essentially are going to be going almost identical to how they would in the main, events of the story, except the one thing that's going to be a bit of a small change in this instant is essentially just Naruto dealing with Kiba. Naruto's defeat over Kiba is going to be changing a lot because it would go something like this. See, I picture Kiba jumping into the ring and kind of being extremely cocky. That's just in his personality to do so. He would immediately begin engaging Naruto using the Fang over Fang attack, and when he's doing this, Naruto would not be playing no games. Naruto's not going to be taking it easy on Kiba, so the second that Kiba rushes in with his Fang over Fang attack and he gets within touching distance, Naruto quite simply holds his hands out in like a Kamehameha pose where he has both of his hands out and kind of clenched together closely, and Kiba comes in and Naruto kind of catches him with his hands and turns both Akamaru and Kiba into gold when both of them are just spinning, right? And when that happens, Naruto just kind of drops them to the ground, and Kiba and Akamaru are both just gold, as everybody watches, and Naruto was declared the winner. After this, Naruto would get down on one knee and deactivate his golden touch Kekkei Genkai, as from here, everybody in the stands would be surprised and they would be recalling the day that Naruto, the demon, transformed that one villager into gold and didn't know how to reverse it. But now, that same villager is actually younger than he would have been before because he didn't age in the gold and he wasn't even conscious. So he's younger now compared to everybody else, so he's kind of happy, kind of scared of Naruto at the same time, because it's like he kind of took away a couple of years of his life, but at the same time he didn't, so it's a little convoluted, but that's basically how the Naruto versus Kiba fight would go. Now, as for the rest of the events that would happen following this, essentially nothing really does change until Naruto goes on to meet Jiraiya Sensei. Now, when Naruto meets Jiraiya, this is where events of the canon story are slightly going to begin to alter, because this version of Naruto's chakra control is a little worse than the one that we would have had in the original, just due to the fact that chakra control wasn't exactly his main suit. So instead of Jiraiya trying to teach Naruto about the Nine Tails, he's instead going to be trying to teach Naruto about general chakra control and how to use his abilities. Also, teaching him the summoning jutsu just in case he needs it, and he definitely will need it because of the Gaara fight that he's going to be participating in later on in this video. That said though, basically what ends up happening is Naruto goes on to bond with Jiraiya Sensei a bit, and Jiraiya is pretty much the only person who hasn't looked at Naruto as a weirdo, as, you know, just kind of judged him. Naruto finally found somebody that doesn't judge him for everything that everybody else says and instead looks past everything and just looks at Naruto as what he is, a kid that needs some attention, a kid that maybe needs a fatherly figure in his life, and somebody who honestly has been yearning for that for the longest. Naruto finally has some comfort in his life, and that's in Jiraiya. Even though he calls him Pervy Sage, Naruto can't help but feel, you know, just comfort in Jiraiya. That said, this next month of training would be incredible for Naruto, and his character would develop just a bit, becoming a tad bit more relaxed due to the fact that now he's hanging out with Jiraiya, someone who has more of a goofy personality. See, for the beginning of the story, we're kind of going to have Naruto be in this box where he doesn't want to let his walls down so that nobody can really get to meet the real Naruto. But after the time skip goes on to happen, Naruto's then going to come back a bit more of a serious version of what we got in the original, and more along the lines of what we got to see in the first episode of Shippuden, when Naruto acted, you know, responsible, and then suddenly he revealed that, you know, maybe not that responsible. But instead, we're going to get a more responsible Naruto who's still funny and, you know, still the lovable character that we all know and love. That said, what basically goes on to happen following this little situation is essentially we get the battle between Naruto and Neji. And following that, we're then going to be having the battle between Shikamaru and Temari. Obviously, Temari wins that, but she forfeits after. And Naruto versus Neji goes on to happen, like many of you guys would probably expect. Neji is a close range fighter, so that's really, really bad for Neji off the bat. Because if Naruto touches you even once, you're pretty much, it's GG after that. You're not escaping Naruto touching you to gold. You gotta rip your limbs off literally if you want to escape anything along those lines. So it's a little bit of a stretch for me to try to even make this battle even a tad bit interesting, just because Naruto is not exactly gonna just sit there and be like, oh, okay, Neji, let me actually, you know, let me let you hit me. You know, Neji, get your one, because one is going to turn into 64 palms real quick, so Naruto's not going to be doing that. So instead what happens, or what I think would happen in character for this version of Naruto, is essentially Neji jumps into the ring being extremely cocky, splurting nonsense about destiny, and Naruto would not even sit there and rebuttal him. He doesn't care about destiny, he doesn't care about Neji's viewpoints, he only cares about advancing and becoming a Chunin. So essentially what ends up happening is when Neji gets cocky and gets into his fighting stance, Naruto looks to Neji and they both rush in at each other. Now Neji is obviously the superior taijutsu combatant, but Naruto has a different style of taijutsu that revolves around pretty much getting his hands or feet or anything close to you. Because if Naruto's the one that directly makes contact with you and, you know, he touches you with his hands, or he kicks you with his leg, or, you know, you kick him in a spot where he's activating his gold Kekkei Genkai, you're pretty much screwed. And essentially what happens is Naruto would go on to attack Neji. Neji is being extremely wary, seeing as he saw what happened to Kiba. He's throwing attacks, and Neji's dodging as fast as he possibly can, and eventually Neji begins striking at Naruto's chakra points. When this happens, he strikes one wrong spot, and Naruto smiles as he grabs onto Neji's arm, and Neji would think no, as suddenly he's turned to gold, and Naruto would then be declared the winner. No need for Naruto to unveil the Kurama chakra, no need for Naruto to come in and uppercut Neji. Instead, Naruto was able to actually clutch it up using his own abilities without needing help from nobody. So, that's kind of a good thing, right? But regardless of that, now we end up getting into what ends up happening following this, which is essentially the Sasuke versus Gaara fight. Literally nothing's going to change here. I don't see Naruto impacting this portion of the story whatsoever. So we're kind of just going to jump to the point where Naruto's finally facing up against Gaara. And we're jumping into the point where Naruto's already on top of Gamabunta, right? He's on top of Gamabunta, and they're both essentially getting ready to use the transformation jutsu to essentially latch on to Shukaku and let Naruto go over towards Gaara and touch him so that he can turn Shukaku into gold, or just knock him out, or just punch him to wake him up. And that's what Naruto's essentially doing. So Naruto would jump on top. Gaara would end up using his sand to pretty much cover Naruto with. Naruto, he's angry. He's trying to break out with all of his strength, and he would do so. And eventually he would get close to Gaara and pretty much go on to touch him with one finger. This finger would be enough for Gaara to essentially turn to gold, and all of Shukaku would do so as well. And eventually, Naruto, after, breaking free of all the sand, would end up essentially going towards the direction of Gaara and undoing his ability and just knocking some sense into Gaara. They both fall down very rapidly, and it's at this moment that Naruto would tell Gaara that the reason that he's so strong is because he's fighting for something. He's fighting for his village. He's fighting for his friends. He's not fighting for family, because unfortunately he doesn't have that. But he would look to Gaara as both of his siblings arrive, and he would look at him and tell him, "You have something I don't. You still have family, Gaara. Cherish that." Gaara looks down at the ground and says, "Thank you, Naruto." And suddenly we have the gay Gaara coming in. And by gay Gaara, I mean like the sus one, the one that literally is such a weirdo. Like he changes his hairstyle. He starts being a weirdo, and the dude is just, it's not okay, boys. I know y'all know what I mean, but Gaara just turns into a lame, and that's all I can say. But regardless of said fact, what ends up happening following this small situation is basically Naruto goes back to the village and ends up finding Hiruzen dead, right? Hiruzen is now pretty much dead, and Naruto realizes this and doesn't even get upset. Not a single tear is shed. Hiruzen and him were never exactly close, so when he finds out about his death, it doesn't hit him as hard as it would in the original. And when Jiraiya asked Naruto to actually go on a journey with him to teach him a new jutsu and also find the next Hokage, Naruto almost wants to decline, because he doesn't really care about the Hokage position as much, seeing as how horrible Hiruzen treated him, and also just due to the fact that his goals are a little different than they would have been in the original. How do I put this? Naruto doesn't exactly live to become a Hokage. Instead, Naruto just wants to be left alone and to be respected. Not to be loved by all, but to be respected by some. So to Naruto, having the respect of Jiraiya, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi, it's more than enough. He would go on this journey with Jiraiya, and he would go on to learn the Rasengan in the multi-step plan that Jiraiya creates. First, the water balloon, then the rubber ball, and then he has to essentially conjure the Rasengan in his hand. But regardless of all that, we basically end up getting into the portion when Naruto essentially gets ambushed by Itachi and Kisame. And when Naruto goes on to essentially open the door, he kind of doesn't really have too much of a choice, right? He goes over to open the door, and he immediately would see the eyes of Itachi Uchiha staring back at him. As soon as he sees that, Naruto jumps back and is pretty much terrified of Itachi, because he can sense how much just power is coming off of Itachi himself, and when he would look towards the man with the fish-like eyes and fish-like features, he would begin losing his mind, right? He begins trying to run away. He breaks a hole through the wall and jumps on top of the roof, and it's at this point that Itachi and Kisame would both follow him effortlessly. They would begin toying with Naruto, and Naruto would begin to essentially try to do his best. You know, he's trying to fight off Itachi and Kisame, two legendary warriors in and of themselves, so Naruto's not exactly doing the best. But one thing that would happen is essentially Naruto would say, well, it's now or never, as he slams his hands down onto the building that they're on and pretty much begins to, how do I put this? He pretty much begins to turn the entirety of the building into gold, along with everybody in it and everybody making physical contact with it. So Jiraiya and Itachi, upon seeing that everything began turning to gold, immediately jumped up into the air and kept airtime for as long as they possibly could, before landing back on solid gold, and Naruto questioning, you know, what just happened, like, how come it didn't work? They both land back, and Naruto would then say that he needs to whip out his strongest card, suddenly going on to coat himself with a thin gold aura. Now, it's not an aura as much as it is armor. Think about it like a second layer of skin, similar to Gaara's, you know, skin of sand where it like protected him. That's pretty much what Naruto just created, except with gold. And instead of that actually looking like a normal human, it actually makes Naruto's clothes gold, his face gold, and everything about him gold. Yes, even his I mean, what? But anyways, Naruto goes on to essentially look towards the direction of Itachi and Kisame, and it's at this point that Kisame would lunge at Naruto's direction. When he does so, he would swipe at him with his sword and essentially send Naruto crashing through like 3 different buildings. But since he has his golden armor on, it only almost killed him. That's, oh my god, I need to stop. But seriously, it didn't almost kill him, but it did heavily injure him. Naruto just so happens to crash into the same area that Jiraiya was in, and when Jiraiya sees Naruto like that, he immediately gets up and begins getting into fighting stance using the Toad Mouth Jutsu to actually trap Kisame inside of said Toad Mouth Jutsu and begin essentially making them both run away, leading him to be able to actually tend to Naruto's wounds and Sasuke to arrive just a second late to stop his brother Itachi. He would see Itachi, and Itachi would turn back to Sasuke before telling him that he's weak and then just running off. But he doesn't have the moment when he gets Tsukiyomi'd and essentially has to see his parents die over and over again like 1,000 times. It's some sort of sick joke by Itachi. Have you guys ever heard those one things where it's like, would you rather, you know, have to see your parents, you know, kind of study every single day or join in once to stop it? That's literally what Itachi's doing, except it's even worse because he's actually making him watch his parents die to his hands like over and over and over and over. And it's this twisted sick game. So because this doesn't happen, Sasuke doesn't feel as much resentment, and so his hatred isn't large enough for Sasuke to end up essentially going off with Orochimaru when the Sound Genin come after him. Instead, in this version of events, Sasuke is essentially going to be kidnapped because he tries to put up a fight, but after he ends up pretty much getting a taste of, you know, what their curse marks are like, he ends up pretty much wanting to join, like having curiosity, but not fully being convinced about it. Sasuke tells them that he's not going to be joining them, and they beat him into submission, shove him in a box, and literally kill the dude. They kill him, except, you know, he's coming back to life, right? So he's not exactly fully dead, but, you know, he's also not alive, like 100% either. So basically, what ends up happening following this is I picture it like this, right? I know I didn't exactly cover the portion with Tsunade, Naruto, the bet that they would have made, or even the portion where Orochimaru, you know, challenges Tsunade, but that's only because those events don't exactly change. Think about it this way. Naruto has a golden touch Kikigenkai. This touch Kikigenkai doesn't exactly affect the story too much when it comes to the fights that he takes part in, except it kind of does affect the world that he lives in. Because due to Naruto actually being able to, you know, kind of change the situation just a little bit, events played out differently, so now Sasuke doesn't have enough hatred. And not only that, but Naruto's still able to trick Tsunade into joining back with the Leaf Village. Not only that, but on top of that said fact, Naruto is now also able to essentially make it so that his battle between Kabuto and himself goes a lot easier than it would have been in canon. turns Kabuto to gold, and with this, they're able to actually make it so that they are able to retreat faster, and Orochimaru gets out of there quicker, but Naruto doesn't undo his golden touch ability. Orochimaru has to kind of try with trial and error to essentially de-transform Kabuto from the strange state that he finds himself in, and he does eventually end up cracking the code. It just takes about a year or so to actually end up making it go away. And it's not because Orochimaru ends up cracking the code like I said, but more or less because the golden touch doesn't exactly last forever. No, never mind. Orochimaru does crack the code, because if I make the golden touch not last forever, then the things that Naruto sells to people would literally like disappear in a year, and then Naruto would have gotten berated by them. So I changed my mind, okay? So instead of that happening, we basically have Orochimaru figuring out a cure, and yeah. And around this time, we basically have it so that Naruto essentially went off to find Sasuke, along with all the genin that went along on that mission. All of those situations essentially go down just like they would have in canon, except for the battle between Naruto and Kimimaro. When Naruto and Kimimaro begin trying to engage in a battle, Naruto would simply scoff, saying he doesn't have time for this, immediately activating his multi-shadow clone jutsu and having all of his clones rush in at Kimimaro with the attempt of simply grabbing onto him with one hand, even one finger. Eventually, since 1,000 people are actually coming at Kimimaro, there's no way on earth that he's going to be able to dodge all of those attacks. So basically what ends up happening is Kimimaro gets caught off guard, and he ends up actually being transformed into gold, leading to Lee arriving drunk as usual, but this time actually being able to run with Naruto to go after Sasuke. So this means that not only is Lee going to be there with Naruto, but Gaara is actually going to catch up to them as well. So now it's going to be Naruto, Lee, and Gaara versus corrupt Sasuke. And you tell me how you think that battle would go. Regardless of how cool the Naruto versus Sasuke fight was in the original, Naruto, Gaara, and Lee versus Sasuke just sounds cool on paper to me. But hey, that's just a thing. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, that's just me though, right? All in all though, if you really started to think about it, this fight actually does have a lot of potential. I mean, think about it. You have Lee rushing in at Sasuke, with Sasuke being confident about his Sharingan, and eventually getting slapped around by Lee once again, being a little bit of a flashback to the moment when Lee actually beat the ever-living crap out of Sasuke the first time around when he met him at said Chunin exams. And then Gaara would just come in with the sand, actually getting a bit of a rematch against Sasuke, but Sasuke just jumping back, doing cartwheels and stuff like that to dodge all the sand, inevitably getting caught off guard by one of the sand things that, Gaara would create, with Sasuke having to build the Chidori and slam his hand into the sand set itself and immediately jump away, only for Naruto to jump up into the air and immediately grab hold of Sasuke, immediately turning him into gold and making it so that Sasuke is not able to actually run away. He then jumps down to the final valley and lands on said water before catching Sasuke, who's entirely made of gold now, and dragging him all the way back to the Leaf Village in one fell swoop. And bro, like, I know the original fight between Naruto and Sasuke was cool, but I kind of feel like this little situation that I just kind of made in my head, it's also just as cool, if not better. So this time around, Naruto actually saves Sasuke from himself and actually makes it so Sasuke remains in the village. So instead of training with Orochimaru, he ends up training alongside Kakashi. Naruto continues training with the legendary Sannin Jiraiya. Sakura continues training with Tsunade. And so after the time skip that would happen in the original, events would kind of start pretty much overlapping and leading to things kind of happening just like they would have in the original. By the way, guys, if you guys heard like a motorcycle outside, sorry, it's one of my neighbors. He likes to ride around in it a lot, but yeah. Anyways though, right, so that's pretty much how that situation goes down, and we then are pretty much greeted by the time skip, and then suddenly, like the screen goes black. We get like a 2 years later thing that pops up on the screen, and now we have Naruto on top of the village saying, "I'm home!" We then zoom into two familiar faces, Sakura and Sasuke, who are both down below waiting for Naruto to get down from there. Immediately Naruto jumps down and Sasuke would look to Naruto before asking him how he's been. Naruto looks back to Sasuke and then goes on to say he's been doing great, and Sakura would just, be like, "Wow, Naruto, you sure have changed," instead of hitting him with "notice anything different," because now she has Sasuke there, so, she doesn't care about Naruto because Sasuke's there. Naruto goes on to pretty much explain that this past 2 years have been spent great and that Naruto has actually learned a lot of things over that time. Sasuke looks at Naruto and tells him that that's great and that he should show him sometime. And Naruto goes on to explain to Sasuke that, you know, his abilities have advanced so much, he's not sure he could even actually have anybody put up a fight against him. And Sasuke begins to essentially begin laughing, saying, "You always did know how to make a joke, Naruto." Suddenly, we see Jiraiya popping up and informing Naruto to go visit Tsunade, telling him that that's pretty much the first thing that they should have done the second that they got to the village. Naruto looks back to Jiraiya and says, "Oh right, Share Pervy Sage," before he then pretty much goes on to go towards the direction of Tsunade. From here, she goes on to pretty much praise Naruto and Jiraiya and explaining to them that they actually did a great job and that Naruto is actually going to be essentially promoted to Chunin if he can, you know, show her how much stronger he's gotten. Naruto says, "So what, a fight? You want me to fight you, Tsunade?" And Tsunade would go, No, I want you, Sakura, and Sasuke to face off against Kakashi, Jiraiya, and myself." And Naruto looks at her and says, "Yo, what?" And she says, "I want all of you to face your mentors." And she then pretty much goes on to like grab her fists and then clench them together before saying, "And Sakura, I'm not going easy on you." Sakura from this moment looks down to the ground and has this sort of like helpless expression before she finally gains her resolve and goes, "Cha!" And Sasuke just looks at Kakashi before then kind of smirking and saying, "All right then, sounds good." All three of them get onto the battlefield and the battles would go something like this. Obviously, Sakura is going to be losing to Tsunade and she's pretty much going to go around being a nuke, just punching everything extremely hard and making explosions go off in the background, right? Similar to what Deidara would be doing, except hers just punching, and it's not that big of explosions, but it is causing friendly fire. Sasuke would have rushed into Kakashi and they would have gotten to a taijutsu attack. They would be going back and forth, and eventually Sasuke would get caught off guard by Kakashi's tactics. Both of them would look to be about even, but Kakashi's speed would actually be just a bit faster than Sasuke, and since Sasuke isn't exactly trying to kill Kakashi and the only real way to win is to pretty much subdue your opponent, Kakashi ends up getting Sasuke to the ground relatively with extreme difficulty and pretty much putting a kunai to his neck. Sasuke then goes on to grit his teeth and say that that was a lucky shot. And Kakashi then goes on to smile before Naruto jumps in the way and pretty much transforms Kakashi to gold. Kakashi's stuck in place and Naruto will then look towards Jiraiya, who's already transformed into gold and already knew he would be because for the past couple of years, for the past couple months, Naruto has had perfect control over his golden touch abilities, making it so that he doesn't even have to make direct contact with you to pretty much turn you to gold. He can simply step on the ground, turn anything that's making physical contact with the ground to gold now, so Naruto is way too OP for Jiraiya to even stack up against him. Naruto then looks towards Tsunade, who would punch at the ground. Naruto rises up into the air, whips up a gigantic Rasengan, smashes it into the earth as Tsunade jumps back, and then Naruto would pretty much appear behind her with such superb speed that she would be shocked. She would turn around and be turned to gold instantly as she says, "What?" And she just was turned to gold. There was not a thing Tsunade could have done to save herself at that moment, and everybody pretty much watching the fight essentially knew what was about to happen. Because Naruto, my man Naruto was not there to play no types of games. He was going to get his job done and make his move to whatever else is next. Eventually, after the fight was over, Naruto then went on to pretty much de-transform everybody from their golden states and then go on to be informed by Tsunade a couple of hours later after being released. Well, not only Naruto, but everybody would be told about the Kazekage's kidnapping. Immediately, all of them would go towards the direction of the Hidden Sand Village. Kakashi would be attacked by Lady Chiho, Sakura would make a poison antidote for Kankuro, and then the team would finally make their way towards Sasori and Deidara. Now, Sasori and Deidara are going to be two of the quickest fights that I think I'll ever end up pretty much breaking down on the channel. Because picture it something like this. Sakura rushes in, right? This is going to be one of those like really OP moments of Naruto just showcasing how strong he's gotten, right? And it's going to be kind of like an anime edit, you know, the ones where it's like the music in the background and it's like boring, you know, like that stuff, right? So basically Sakura breaks down the rock that was in the way, and Deidara immediately tries to like fly out, but Naruto just sticks one hand out and touches the bird, causing the bird and Deidara to be turned to gold instantly and fall to the ground, with Deidara just with a like shocked expression on his face. And Naruto then steps in, only to see Sasuke, who was not trying to play no games, rush in with a Chidori and then strike right at the puppet that Sasori was inside of. This would shatter it and reveal Sasori's real puppet form, and then Lady Chiho, Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi, and Naruto would face off against Sasori, only to pretty much defeat him very rapidly without even Sasori having to actively want to, you know, be on you know, suicide's watch, I guess you could say, and pretty much take out Sasori no problem. This is when Gaara would then get revived by Lady Chiho, and that entire mission would pretty much be taken care of as quickly as it started. They end up making their way back to the village, and once they do arrive, they have about a couple of days of just normal, you know, just getting into the groove of things, right? As this is all happening, Naruto Sensei would essentially go off to the land of the rain, right? Jiraiya goes off in search of the leader of the Akatsuki. Naruto doesn't want him to go alone, but he wasn't informed when Naruto left, so Jiraiya sadly still dies. Naruto still has a session of depression. Shikamaru, Sasuke, Sakura, and everybody who would have been there for him in the original would be there, with, you know, the added addition of Sasuke making things a little bit easier. And Naruto feels extremely sad, thinking that, you know, he was pretty much like a father to him. That said, Naruto vows to defeat the Akatsuki, and it's at this moment that Naruto realizes and catches wind of the fact that, well, how do I put this? Shikamaru sensei pretty much also died. Naruto would be pretty angry at that, and since he can actually get revenge on that person, Naruto goes on to essentially rush in and handle Kakazu, except instead of using a gigantic Rasen Shuriken, which Naruto won't learn, Naruto instead of that would actually just turn Kakazu to gold and imprison him in the Hidden Leaf Village, leading to them finding out new information about the Akatsuki, and then also having Sasuke leave the village pretty much in search of finding his brother and defeating him. He doesn't go there with Taka, so when the battle would finally pretty much cease to, you know, when the battle would cease and Obito ends up pretty much kidnapping Sasuke, telling him the truth about his brother, Sasuke goes on to say that, well, whatever his truth was, Itachi wasn't a bad guy, and that, you know, realizing he had it all wrong, thinking that everything that Itachi did was pretty much for the village and himself. And Sasuke then goes on to vow that he'll protect the village at all costs, but he doesn't say this out loud, and instead he tells Obito he'll destroy the Leaf Village. After this, Sasuke gets his brother's eyes implanted into himself, unlocking the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan after unlocking the Mangekyo Sharingan at the revelation, and eventually then going on to get a huge power amp to his already insane abilities. From this point forward, we essentially have Sasuke quote unquote join the Akatsuki and go off to take Killer Bee, but instead of going after Bee, he pretty much returns to the Leaf Village only to find it in shambles, and everybody essentially cheering for Naruto as, oh sorry, I hit my mic and knocked over my pop filter. But as Sasuke returns, he's greeted to this image of Naruto being thrown up by the people of Konoha and finally respected as a member of their village. Naruto has a huge grin on his face, and Sasuke just thinks to himself that he knew he would do it, with Sasuke knowing that now he knows his true goal, to become the Hokage and defend the Hidden Leaf Village. Naruto's pretty happy all in all, and right, so Naruto's happy, Sasuke's happy, and the events are progressing way faster than I honestly would have expected them to. I thought that this was going to be like a 30-minute video, but it's now looking like I'll be lucky to even make it to 15 minutes. But let's see. So I probably should have crammed this into the last part, honestly. It's whatever. I'll just throw it into the movie version. It won't look that bad, right? It'll be like 20, so that's an hour and like 15 minutes. Not that bad. Anyways though, let's see. So basically what ends up happening following the situations that I had already previously broken down, Sasuke returns to the village only to find Naruto had defeated all 6 paths of pain, and also made it so that Nagato was willing to actually use the Rebirth Jutsu to bring everybody back. Now, the reason that I didn't go into detail on the Pain fight is just due to the fact that Naruto, pretty much when he was fighting the Paths of Pain, would step on the ground with 3 of them already instantly getting transformed to gold, and the Diva Path being the only one he really had to fight. Konohamaru destroyed one, and I'm pretty sure the other ninjas in the village would have also had taken part in destroying one. So once Naruto faced off against the Diva Path, Naruto pretty much took a straightforward approach, launching a huge amount of, shadow clones towards the direction, only for them to get repelled, and then suddenly learning of that ability having a 5-second cooldown. After Naruto learned this, he pretty much speed blitzed Pain and was able to essentially make it so that Pain had to stay in the air or essentially get transformed to gold. Inside of said air, Naruto went on to use a bunch of Wind Nature Chakra styles to actually hit Pain from the air, and once things became too difficult, Naruto was able to actually activate his 4-tailed QB state to shoot a bunch of tailed beast bombs, causing Pain to actually have to use the Chibaku Tensei, I believe it was, to essentially capture Naruto in the air. Naruto, however, this time around didn't lose himself to the power of the 9 tails after talking to his father Minato, and once he shot down to the ground, he was essentially able to put up a better fight, activating Sage Mode and essentially rushing in with speed incomparable that Pain wasn't even able to detect, leading Naruto to turn him to gold, find one of the chakra rods, track Nagato, and then make everything kind of make sense. Seeing as Sasuke this time around won't be the one who actually goes off to fight against Killer Bee, things are going to be changing heavily from here on out, because the Kage Summit isn't a direct, "Oh, I hate the Hidden Leaf Village. You guys always make the worst, shinobi that always run away from your village. What's wrong with you?" You know what I mean? Instead of that stuff basically happening, we basically get a scene where they're all pretty much talking about what to do. Obito would go on to declare the 4th Great Shinobi World War, and things kind of begin to align towards the original path of what would have happened in the OG Naruto canon events, where everybody goes on to do their best and try to essentially defeat Pain and everybody else who took part in said war. By the way, I just listened back to the recording and noticed that I said Pain instead of Obito because Pain's already defeated, so yeah. Anyways, so instead of things kind of going almost as much, the only real changes to the story is basically going to be when Sasuke sees his brother once more. That fight against Kabuto is going to be helped out a little bit more by Sasuke, but I don't think he can really do much more in terms of that. And when it comes to Naruto facing off against Nagato and, Edo Itachi, he's able to use his Gold Keiki Genkai to essentially defeat both of them and lead Naruto to gain incredible power that he never thought he would have been able to gain otherwise. And then once he ends up finding Edo Tensei Madara, this is where things kind of begin to get a little clouded, I guess you could say. Because when he fights Edo Tensei Madara for the very first time, you guys remember the moment when he brought down 2 meteors and stuff? Naruto, instead of rushing at him with a Rasen Shuriken or even throwing it at him, would instead actually rush in at Madara's direction and engage in a taijutsu battle. And because Madara has no idea of this Gold Keiki Genkai, Naruto's able to actually catch Madara off guard and encase him inside of the Gold Keiki Genkai, for everybody else to use sealing jutsus and put Madara back where he belongs. And since the what's it called? The Edo Tensei? No, not the Edo Tensei, but the, oh my god, what's it called? The, otherworld reincarnation. The jutsu that basically brought him back to life as a dead corpse is pretty much canceled out. So once Naruto goes to the main battlefield and ends up facing off against Obito like he would in the original, and Kakashi, he pierces Obito in the heart. After he becomes a 10-tailed Jinchuriki, and Naruto inevitably gets stomped, because even though Naruto has an OP ability, he still isn't fast enough to defeat Obito. After that happens, Naruto and Sasuke both come back with insane power-ups, right? And would inevitably end up pretty much Talk no Jutsuing Obito, not even using the cool abilities that he got to essentially beat him, but more or less talking him down and out of what he was about to attempt. So once Obito has the 10-tailed Jinchuriki extracted from him, he tells Naruto he doesn't have much time left and apologizes for everything that he did. Naruto goes on to lend him a ton of chakra, and Obito does the only thing that he can think to do to pretty much make amends for everything he has done wrong, essentially using the Rinne Rebirth Jutsu to revive everybody on the battlefield that he would have killed. And by everybody, I don't mean everybody, I mean more or less 25% of the people that he killed, because it's too many to revive, right? And after reviving them, Obito pretty much falls to the ground looking at Kakashi, telling him that he's sorry for the way that things turned out. Kakashi smiles back at Obito and says, you know, I didn't expect things to end like this, but I'm glad, you know, your final moments were spent being a good person like I always knew you were. Obito smiles, looks down and says, I'll see you soon, Rin. And that is where the chapter would close on what if Naruto had Midas's golden touch. If you guys enjoyed the entire movie, or, you know, if you guys are watching this as a final part, then I do really appreciate the, you know, support on these videos. And if you want to help out the channel a bit more, you can actually consider becoming a member down below. That said, it has been your boy Zether. I'm out, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.